Thank you very much, as always, to the Eora Nation for your warm welcome. I think every year Garma steps up in its significance, particularly in regard to the education of us all. I came to this place 30 years ago, and I think, as I sit here today, that my education has only just begun. I'd like to acknowledge the Chairman of Yothu Bapaji Galarrwuy, and I feel when I come here, I think like most people, when we come to this place, we feel that we've come home. I'd like to pay my respects to traditional owners, custodians of the land on which we're meeting today. I'd like to also extend my respects to elders past and present and reflect on the incredible job you have done against decades of pressure to maintain the integrity of your culture that you have done in North East Arnhem Land. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge and share everyone's sadness at the death of Emma Bell, the Homelands teacher at Maningrida College, who perished on flight MH17. I'd particularly like to thank and acknowledge the honouring of her by the Maningrida people with a skin name, for adopting her into a Maningrida family, and particularly for the smoking ceremony that helped her and her friends grieve her passing. Thank you for that. I know Emma wanted a better future for Aboriginal Islander people. We all do. And I think that's a common thematic amongst all of us, why we come to Garma. Last year at the festival, the ABC interviewed Jawa. And as always, Jawa made it very plain. He said, good people come to Garma and they talk. And he said, but it's the action we want to see from these people, not talk, talk, talk like politicians. We want action. Bang, he said. We want action straight away. Well, Jawa, I can tell you, whilst not as emphatic as you'd wish, I think this government is getting on with ensuring children attend school, adults have jobs and communities are safer. And I want to make just a quick point. I've used the term government, but hopefully in years to come we'll be able to genuinely use the word parliament. You know, I come to this place with great memories. I've got my mate Warren Snowden, and they said, oh, that's a bit of an odd thing to say, Nigel. Well, yes, we go to war every 3 years, but the rest of the time we share a passion for Aboriginal people. Martin Ferguson, recent, perhaps more than recent history, the Prime Minister of Australia, Bob Hawke, all of a completely separate political persuasion from I. But I believe that all of these people would agree that where we want to get to, we have a united vision of that. And on how we have to get there, sure, we're going to have our differences. But I think over the past few years, I have a sense that the bipartisanship we talk about is becoming a reality. We are working together as a parliament to set aside the tensions we only need politically from time to time around an election. And I would like to congratulate my parliamentary colleagues for the efforts that have achieved that. The Prime Minister stood here last year and promised to do the things that we'd said we'd do. He also said he'd spend a week in a year in an Indigenous community, starting with the Eora community. So he's coming back in September here in North East Arnhem Land to spend a week here, and given the incredible contribution and emphatic contribution made by the Chairman of Yothu Galarrwuy and Jawa and others, I think I have some work to do between now and September. The Prime Minister has asked me to read a personal message to you this morning. I am pleased to send this message to everyone attending the 2014 Garma Festival. The government is building a new engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I hope it will rest on trust, mutual responsibility, respect for culture, and working together on local solutions to close the gap. The themes of this year's Garma Festival, responsibility, reform and recognition, are at the heart of what I hope we can achieve together. The government will work with communities to ensure that children go to school, adults go to work and communities are safe. These reforms should mean funding for local communities, for local solutions. And we have begun a national conversation about recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution. The success of the Garma Festival shows that vision can become a reality when people work together. If we all take responsibility, if we can work together, I'm certain that tomorrow will be better than today. I send everyone my best wishes for an enjoyable Garma Festival. As the Prime Minister says, there is a new spirit of engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people based on mutual respect and responsibility. So it's great that this morning we get to talk about responsibility. Responsibility underpins both of the other topics of the festival, the reforms that are required and the constitutional recognition. Responsibility to each other in a yonal sense is certainly built into family relationships, is part of community life, and we are responsible to each other. So when government asks you to be responsible for getting your kids to school, we've got to be responsible to make sure that we have a good education. We need to ensure that we employ remote school attendance officers and supervisors. So there are roles that go with each of those responsibilities. So when we ask you to earn or learn, or when we tighten the welfare rules, it's a reflection of what you have told us. Sit-down money wrecks community life and is inconsistent with thousands of generations of hard-working ancestors. In return, business and government are responsible for creating those jobs so that people can take up meaningful work and get skills to do those jobs. So responsibility is not just applicable in Aboriginal and Islander communities, it is applicable to everyone in Australia. So Ballina have an equal responsibility to learn about Aboriginal and Islander culture, to say no to racism and to recognise Aboriginal and Islander people in our Constitution. We want what you want. We want to restore to elders and respected community leaders the respect, the influence, the resources and the support they need to fix the challenges in their own communities and do it in a way that works for them in that particular community. Now, the opposite of responsibility is excuses, and we've all heard them. Reasons to do nothing are simply not good reasons. We have no choice but to change the way that we do things. Without change, compared with other Australians, an Aboriginal and Islander Australian born in the 21st century will be 2.5 years behind in reading, maths and science by the time they reach year 10. As a 10 to 17-year-old, more than 30 times more likely to be in juvenile detention on an average night. As a 17 to 24-year-old, less than half as likely to be in full-time work or in study. But disadvantage is not about being an Aboriginal person or a Torres Strait Islander person. Disadvantage comes from being unemployed, being dependent on welfare and not having a good education. As leaders, we all have a responsibility to change the story. I believe, an eternal optimist perhaps, but I believe that the opportunities for change are well within our reach. I can sense a real groundswell of willpower and purpose. There are 3 ways we can work together to close the gap: school attendance, jobs and economic opportunity. fundamental to everything, we have to get children into school, and that's not my motivation. My motivation is to get children an education. There is no difference in the rate of employment between someone who finishes Year 12, whether you're an Aboriginal Islander person or a non-Aboriginal Islander person. So if you have that education difference, you close the gap. It is simple. So their laws in every state and territory are pretty clear. School attendance is the parent's responsibility and school attendance is compulsory. Elders and community leaders have made it clear with their communities it needs to be a community expectation that kids should be in school and a community effort to get the kids back to school. And I'd have to take this opportunity to thank all of those communities who now have taken the reins of their own community. So many of the RAS sites community, I go into the community and they are doing it on their own. They are finding new and innovative ways. They know that they can exercise the cultural authority on those who are not participating in the way that they think they should. So congratulations to the communities for the wonderful work that you are doing. Now, the parents in the remote communities have asked the government for help in getting these kids to school. Now, that's a fair ask, so we've put in place the remote school attendance strategy. And I can tell you this strategy wasn't something that I, on coming into government, suddenly said, oh, that's a good idea. It was fundamentally a strategy that has been put by the communities. And as Warren and others would know, if we can get ownership in a program, if we can get it to be the community's program, then it, without doubt, will succeed. So that attendance strategy is now operating in 73 schools in 69 remote communities. But it's tailored to suit each community and it's working. We've employed local people who know local families. They do everything they can to encourage the kids to school, from driving the minibus, chasing away the cheeky dogs from the bus stops, working with the community store owners to ensure that the kids aren't wagging school and sneaking through past the store, making sure that the kids are back at school all day, no hanging around the shop. They're just doing whatever it needs and whatever it takes. These individuals have done an absolutely outstanding job. Now, we're monitoring school attendance, I have to say, in a way that we've certainly never been aware of before. In the Northern Territory, at the end of every day, I get yesterday's figures. At the end of every day, I get yesterday's figures, every day. And so we're able to understand far more about the movement of children, the movement of families. I think this has been remarkably successful, and as a consequence of the individuals in the communities and of the communities themselves, across the Northern Territory, we have had an increase of 17% in terms of school attendance, and that is a sustainable position. It's a good start. I suspect, as you would all know, some of that was low-hanging fruit, just needed a bit of encouragement. But we need to address what happens when we have the drop in attendance. So the first thing I did, I talked to the communities, and to a community they said, we don't really want any compliance first off. We want to see what we can do without having the copper knocking on the door with, if you don't do this, this will happen. We just think we just need time to organise everybody and to see who we can get without the humbug. So that's what we've done. So we've now said there has to be a point at which we need to have another level where we are going to have a bit of humbug, where we are going to have a little bit of compliance to convince those people who can't be convinced by people in their own community, who can't be convinced by the cultural authority, because somebody needs to exercise the rights of that child on their behalf. We understand that there are three principal issues: football, funerals and Fridays. The data is absolutely empirical. So, working with the communities on that, I must thank the AFL and the footy carnivals and everyone who's been involved in this. We'll be moving to ensure that they are positioned in the annual calendar to have the minimum impact on school attendance. In terms of funerals, this is a very difficult issue. Parents have a cultural obligation to travel and to go to places where either sorry business, funeral or cultural business is being held. So it's our responsibility, not to humbug people not to do it, but to ensure that the transport is available and the culturally appropriate people to drive that transport to continue to connect children with an education can happen right across our nation, and that has now been achieved. Parents need to also think about taking their children away on Fridays into the town or the bush. We did some work on it, and as Warren would no doubt remember, this is again a culture of our own making. In the CDP days, we had the white fella who ran the CDP used to say, wink, nod a nod, don't worry, we've got a paperwork on Fridays. They'd take off to town. That's how we created a 4-day week in Indigenous communities. We need to acknowledge that, and we need to change what we do. So, no Commonwealth body in a community is going to shut on Fridays. We will be staying open to meet and provide leadership to the expectations we do of the community. The tragedy is, if you miss an average of 1 day a week, you will miss 2 years of schooling over 10 years. So that 1 day a week means that you're not going to get an education. With the best will in the world and all the wind up your sail, you're just simply not going to get there. So I'd like to again just say that the cultural authorities in Arnhem, in the Kimberley, in the desert region, have been tackling these really tough questions, not on my behalf, but on the community's behalf. And I have to say they have just done a fantastic job. And I think that some of the things you'll hear here at Garma about the strength of culture and the respect for culture. The respect for culture is always going to be a stronger respect than you'll ever have for me or my government or other governments. We need to acknowledge that. And the way forward is about respecting that they respect their culture. And I deal with their cultural authority, as I should, at best as equals. And when I put to them that these are challenges of us all and I've asked them what they should do, they told me what they were going to do. And they have gone and they have done it. So we thank them. So the carrot-based approach, as I've said, works for many. I think there is a need for a tougher approach, and I'm happy to say the feedback that I've had from our network across all of the communities is that we have tried everything, but some people just need a bit more of an effort and some more humbug. So if there is no good excuse for attendances and absences, amongst other compliance issues, we'll be linking attendance with Centrelink payments in circumstances where the parents are clearly not cooperating, even if we will call a conferencing. So what we'll be doing is saying to people, we need you to come and talk to us about your children's attendance. And that's what we want you to comply with. Sometimes getting your kid to school is far more complex, and we acknowledge that. But it's about you coming to talk to us with your kids about how we can help you. But if you won't even attend a conference, then some sanctions will apply. And I'm delighted to say it comes with the full support of communities. So the process should always involve the government working with parents and sitting down with them to better understand why their kids aren't going to school, how we can help, and then to explain if they don't attend, there'll be a breach. So before this happens, it's not about consultation, it's about all of us understanding and also evolving the perfect circumstance, because we're not motivated by breaching people, we're motivated by being able to talk to parents and get their kids back to school. And those compliance matters may not be the same in every community, and they've got to again reflect the cultural authority and the community's wishes. I think that we are at a turn. I think that getting kids into school, we can do it. We've been able to do that with the support of Parliament and my colleagues on the other side of Parliament. So I think that is probably not as easy, certainly, as I thought. And given that's the case, it gives me great hope for those other areas that we're working on. But in terms of getting our kids to school, we need to reflect for a moment on our successes. Patricia Doolan, she was the winner of this year's NAIDOC Apprentice of the Year Award, an example of what happens when you go to school. She completed Year 12 in 2011, enrolled in the Australian Government's Indigenous Employment Program. She then took part in an intensive workplace preparation training before securing part-time work with the Bank of Queensland, which then went to full-time work. Patricia's story is one that we want for every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. Patricia will succeed in life on every level. She's got a decent education, she has a great job. These things will change, according to her, the future of her family forever and give her the potential to own her own home. Over half of the working age Aboriginal people do not have a job. That is just a shameful statistic. More than half of Aboriginal and Islander people in this country do not have a job. And sadly, it reflects the employment outcomes that we're looking at statistically. They're clearly linked, and that's why we have to look at this across holistically and ensure that we're dealing with all these matters simultaneously. Now, the challenge is, by 2018, the challenge not for government but for Parliament, is that we need to get another 188,000 people, 188,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders into work by 2018 to get parity. Of course, to compound the challenge, in the next 5 years, we're going to have around about 80,000 new young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians join that demographic. So it's a big challenge, but I think if we change the way we've been doing things, if we adopt the good things of the previous governments in a genuine bipartisan thing and build on them, then this is achievable. We believe that the guarantee of a job before starting training that is tailored to the employer's need, because that's where the market is. That's the circuit breaker that will finally deliver sustainable job opportunities for Aboriginal and Islander people. Andrew Forrest's report on Indigenous employment suggests a new approach is needed, using the tax system and the power of the market. And I'd like to acknowledge his presence. Good on you, mate. Great to see you here. Now, this includes training for guaranteed jobs approach, incentives for people to take up work outside of the communities and to commute back for holidays and important events, and incentives and capacity to allow this to happen. We can't just ask people to do something if they don't have the capacity to do it. To encourage businesses to train and employ the most disadvantaged people. Generation 1's vocational training and employment centres, VTECs. They have a job-specific training followed by a guaranteed job. Now, this was an election commitment. That's forget about the politics of that. There's something a government said. But it's interesting, by taking this view, we said, well, we'll do that. And we all go, yeah, sure. Well, I can tell you, it's not our idea. It's this bloke's idea over here. And I think we should all be thieves in the right way. So out of 5,000 jobs we promised, already, we've delivered 4,070 people are in the stream, and every single one of those knows that there is a job. There's an address, something I'm doing, I'm working for a particular employer, I know that. And what more encouragement do you think you want when you're seeking a job to actually know there's one for you? What it looks like, what it's going to be like. And the fact that I'm going in and out of training into the job, into that context. That's made a fantastic change. And in the same way, practical, community-led solutions are working to get kids to school. We've got to create a culture and ways that get adults to work day after day. And again, I'd commend Twiggy for your work in this area, mate. Sorry to steal it, but it's a great idea. And there's always more money chasing good ideas than the other way around, mate. Look, I know that Rio Tinto's decision to suspend production at the Gove refinery has meant less available jobs here in North East Arnhem Land. We want to work with you, and Rio and the Northern Territory Government on new job possibilities, but don't allow us, government, to go away and say, oh, we're thinking about it. Everybody needs to be thinking about it. And anyone has ideas, anyone has a vision about the different way of doing things, see us as part of the family, part of the community, and get in touch with us. So as a minister, I'm now in a position to fix something that I've been advocating for years. I'm determined to make it easier for Aboriginal and Islander people to use their land for economic means and create a future for themselves. Not because I think it's good for them. Not because I think it's good for them. It's because that is what they have been telling me for 30 years. And we have all heard it. Now, last month, Jumblewa was here a little earlier. I was delighted to consent to a grant of a 99-year lease to Jumblewa down in Baniella. So this is the first time an individual who's been granted a long-term lease for home ownership on Aboriginal land in the Northern Land Council region. It's 2014. And I think whilst that's a terrific thing to announce, and good on you Jumblewa and good on you the Land Council, it shouldn't be that much of a surprise that someone has the capacity to own land in a way that they can own their own home in Australia. So we want to do more of this, but we need to do it better. We want to make it easier. We wanted to make it a secure proposition for mortgage lenders, and we want to get it done quickly. Now, Galarrwuy said at the last Garma, land rights is asleep. We need to wake up land rights. Today, he has emphatically said that we still need to wake up land rights. It hasn't been woken up. It is still not working for us. Now, we want to see remote communities that support jobs and businesses, so we're making leasing easily available for individuals and small businesses. Township leasing is simplifying leasing across the whole town. In Tiwi community, Warramyunga, which signed the first township lease in 2007, 15 families are buying their own homes. A successful supermarket complex owned by the traditional owners has opened. They just went and got the money from a mainstream bank. It's profitable and they're doing business. So we have to make sure that local people can get leases in the commercial time frame so they can use their assets to engage in the mainstream economy. No point waiting, listen, we'll get round to that in 18 months. In business, that opportunity would have walked down the creek. So governments and land councils shouldn't be gatekeepers on development. It's time that local people were in the driver's seat for economic development in their local communities. And we have heard today a clear and emphatic cry for decision-making, for real land rights, for a waking of land rights, to be returned to the people on country. Now, I stand by the commitment I made before the election not to change the Land Rights Act. And my word, for people who know me, is my bond. And I said, though, unless the Land Council support it and request it. Now, as a parliament, we're far more nimble than a government. As a parliament, we can change something in a day. We can set things aside, we can give it T status, and we can whip it through. And if it's the will of the Land Council to amend the Land Rights Act, which is a matter for them, in such a way that provides them with more comfort than you might have now about Section 28A, for example, then we will certainly ensure that Parliament will deal with that very, very swiftly. But we certainly need to do better. I think we're going to better utilise the existing provisions in the Act to promote economic development for Aboriginal people. This means we need to approach our work more commercially and make better use of what we have. I'll be reintroducing the regulation to improve the existing laws in the Land Rights Act on the delegation of Land Council functions to local Aboriginal corporations. It failed last time. I understand the reasons it failed last time and why the disallowance was supported by the Greens and Labor. I understand that. This is an accelerated precautionary principle. The Labor and the Greens, unless they were very clear about what was going to happen, they sought to protect the interests of the only thing that Aboriginal people have left, and that's their land. And I respect that. I had some possibly less disrespectful things to have to my opposition on the day, but that's the way it goes. But I'm signalling that I'll be, given that we've heard what we've heard today, reintroducing that process. I think it was terrific. You learned so much here. But Jawa, in a word, explained the motivation for the Land Rights Act at a time where people just needed a breath, just needed some protection from the constant can we, will we, can we shoot it, can we dig it up, can we cut it down, just here, we can't breathe. We're suffocated by that. And so they came up with the Land Rights Act and the councils. But as Joe has said, it's a different time now. Have a look at this. Imagine what it takes to organise Garma. I'm sure it's more complex than organising a sitting of Parliament. These individuals and these communities and these leaders have demonstrated that they can do absolutely anything. And they've demonstrated, thanks for the breath, we're right again now. We've got it in control. It's a different environment. And we want to make decisions in a timely fashion on our own land, and I intend to honour that. There is no greater symbolic mark of respect and recognition that we can make about our first Australians than acknowledge our first Australians in Australia's Constitution. I've got a couple of pages that have been written about this, and I'm just going to ignore that for a moment and perhaps share with you my personal motivation for why this is important. I was halfway across the Gulf last night and mysteriously Telstra worked for me. And I got a text from my very good friend, Mr. Wirrapunda in Western Australia. Dave and me have been good friends. And he shared with me, he sent me a Facebook page of a racist rant, an outrageously disgraceful racist rant, of which no Australian would just say, how can somebody possibly do that? And he said, Nigel, can you do something about it? Well, we're doing something about that, but for me, if it's still okay somehow to his mates or some people around them, it means that we still haven't got it right in this country. Still haven't got it right in this country. And I think by having a special recognition and a tidy up and addition in terms of constitutional recognition, we will be sending a signal to all racists in this country. It isn't cool to be a racist. Stay under the rock. And it has a really practical implication. The overwhelming number of Australians don't believe that any form of racism, and indeed the passive racism that every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person will tell you is in their life every day, cannot exist. And I think that this will be a real spear in the heart of the racists of Australia. And so in every way we should support it. I'd like to commend the fantastic work of Recognise in this regard. We do have to think carefully through the options of recognition. I think the processes that we're going through at the moment, and I'd like to commend Ken Wyatt and Nova Peris for the excellent job that they're doing in continuing those discussions. We don't want to have a rush job, we don't want to have a botched job, but I think we need, when Australia is ready, to take advantage of that moment. So we are building public awareness and support for this very important issue. You've all got to take part in this conversation, all of us. And it doesn't matter if you think you're probably not popular, it's probably the most important issues, the most important positions. But everybody is Australia. If we're going to put a spear in the heart of racism, then we've got to participate in this conversation. But if Aboriginal and Islander Australians don't support Recognise, then we can't expect anyone else to. There's a Yonel story about salt water and fresh water flowing together to their final destination at the sea. Even though we've muddied those waters over years, Ballina, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, we can work together and we can still flow in the same direction. This is what the elders, the community leaders, the Prime Minister and I have said, and I believe everyone at Garma wants. This responsibility is ours. I wish you well in the rest of your conference. Talk hard, learn much, go back to your communities refreshed.